Today, our guest of honor is Consul General of Israel, Dr. Hillel Newman. Dr. Hillel Newman assumed the post of Consul General of Israel in July of 2019, where he serves as the senior representative of the State of Israel to the Pacific Southwest. During his 20-year diplomatic service, Consul General Newman accumulated vast experience in policy formulation and decision-making at the highest level of Israel foreign policy establishment. He had served in several influential and critical positions, including policy advisor to 3 foreign ministers of Israel, and ambassador of Israel to Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, both Muslim countries, where he promoted political, business, and security ties with those countries. Before he joined the diplomatic service, he attained a Ph.D. in Jewish history and served as a professor of Jewish history, teaching graduate courses both at Ilan University and Boston University. He has authored and published a book, and in the past 5 years, he has also served as a key lecturer of Judaism in NATO Defense College. He has been intimately involved in the most current and pressing issues confronting global Jewry and has played a key role coordinating efforts relating to strategic threats facing the State of Israel. Consul General Newman made Aliyah with his family from South Africa, served as a medic in the IDF, and is married to Ayala. The couple have one son, Ram. Welcome, Dr. Newman. What an honor it is to have you here. I have to tell you, I was fortunate enough in the past 15 years to personally meet all the consul generals here in Los Angeles personally. And all were very great people. They did a lot for our country and our community. But I have to tell you, you strike me as a little bit different than everybody else in your enva, humility, and your down-to-earth nature. We were in a room full of people the first time we met, and I saw you approach the young teenagers that were in the room. You really showed interest about their involvement in the community and what they aspire to be and how they're going to help the State of Israel. And it really touched my heart. And on numerous occasions, I had to work with you to help people in our community. And I've never saw someone who knows his mission and understand the magnitude and responsibility of his position. And one story that strikes me, I called you after hours. This woman got stuck in JFK. She was pregnant. In the middle of COVID, they canceled all the flights. I called Avner and he connected me to you. And I said, listen, and you said, Eti, it's out of my jurisdiction. Let me see what I can do. Before you know it, their family called me from Australia. They thanked me. They said, Eti, they want to fly to Israel. They made it for Shabbat. And I'm telling you, it warmed my heart. And I just knowing that we have somebody who really cares about our community and about us really warms my heart. So thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, Dr. Newman, for being here today on Yentas in the City. It's such an honor to have you on our show. Dr. Newman, I'd like to take a moment to express that all of Kal Israel mourns the tragic death of the 45 individuals who died in Meron. May their souls have an aliyah. I also wanted to tell you that before we begin our formal interview, I'd like to ask you the million-dollar question, the question of the hour. How do I get into Israel? Everyone listening today wants to know what they need to do to get into Israel. Everything except besides buying a ticket. How do I get in? Non-Israeli citizen versus Israeli citizen. An example would be me versus Eti. I am non-Israeli citizen. How do I get into Israel? Do I need a corona test? Do I need a vaccine? Do I need to quarantine today? This is the million-dollar question that everybody wants to know before we begin our formal interview.
Okay. First of all, it is my pleasure to be on your wonderful program, Yentas in the City. Thank you for inviting me. Eti and Karen, thank you so much for hosting me. It is my pleasure and honor. Yes, we do try and help those who need help. It's a difficult mission because there are thousands that are now knocking on our doors for assistance, and it's impossible to help everyone real time. We have to do it slowly but surely, one by one. Regarding your question. Let me clarify the situation. The situation is that Israelis, those that have Israeli citizenship and Israeli passports, can now travel back to Israel easily. They don't need prior approval. About a month ago, every Israeli needed prior approval to come to Israel. So that has been at last, we've overcome that obstacle. Regarding non-Israelis, those that do not hold an Israeli passport, they do need prior approval in order to come to Israel. Now, there are specific criteria who can get an approval. Like, for instance, the main criteria which is most relevant for most people is if they have a first-degree relative in Israel and they're visiting the first-degree relative. First degree means father, mother, son, daughter, brother, sister, or spouse. So that is the general criteria. There are other criteria like funerals, weddings, things like that, special events. But the general criteria is you must have a first-degree relative and you're visiting the first-degree relative. And then in order to come, you need to just bring documentation. You need to have health insurance, which covers a policy that covers COVID-19 in Israel, abroad, out of the United States. Regarding quarantine, everyone is obligated to quarantine unless they have antibodies. The only way that Israel can feels that it's reliable to know that someone has antibodies is if they go for serological test. And that's a small blood test, which is done in hospitals and clinics in Israel. And if one comes out positive with antibodies, then one is exempt from quarantine. Other than that, one still has to keep the quarantine. The vaccinations here, we do not rely on the documentation. They have to come to Israel, do the serological test, and if they come out positive on antibodies, then they're exempt from quarantine. Now, I'll just add one more thing, which is that United States and Israel are working on what's called a mutual recognition of documents. And if that happens, then automatically all those that have been vaccinated in the United States, their documentation will be recognized in Israel, and then they will be exempt from quarantine automatically.
Oh.
But that has not happened yet. So as of now, people are still obligated for quarantine unless they have antibodies. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes. Now, what happens if, is there a time on the vaccine? Because some people perhaps took the vaccine more than 6 months ago, and then you have a whole slew of people today that are just getting the vaccine. So for the people that took the vaccine more than 6 months ago, is there a different criteria for that group of people?
No, the criteria is the same. If there are antibodies in their blood, that's the criteria. So for some people, if they did the vaccinations, let's say a year ago, it might be that there are no longer any antibodies in their blood, and then they will be obligated for quarantine.
So regardless if you took a vaccine or not, you still have to take the blood test.
You have to have antibodies.
Yes, you have to prove antibodies. And we don't trust yet the documentation from other countries because we have no way of checking the authentication of documents. So as of now, everyone that comes to Israel wants to get out of the quarantine. They have to do a serological test. And then if they show positive on antibodies, they're exempt from quarantine.
I hope by June they're going to accept the I hope by the time I have to travel.
Yeah, I understand.
Well, this is very informative because, you know, there are many people in our community that have children that went to Israel for a gap year and they were unable to go visit their children. And this is, you know, very informative.
Well, as of now, parents can go and visit their children. That's one of the criteria, first degree relative.
Yes.
So if a month ago they could not go, now they can go.
Right.
So that's a big change. And regulations can change. So in a month or two, things might be different. Things might open up completely. The decisions have to be made. We know that we're going that way. We're going in that direction of opening up more and being more lenient on the restrictions. But each decision is taken according to the situation.
Okay, wonderful.
Israel has opened up completely domestically.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that is restricted is incoming travel because they're afraid of mutations coming in.
Yes.
And that's why restrictions are still intact and valid for those who are coming in from abroad.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that for us. Now we'll begin our formal part of the interview. I would like to ask you a little bit about your early life. If you could share with our viewers a little bit about your early life. At what point did you decide to become a diplomat? The road from yeshiva bacher to Israeli diplomat. It's really a Lifetime movie or a Netflix movie.
We joked around about it. We actually said, oh, that's a Lifetime movie.
Well, I'm waiting for the director to come and shoot.
we might find you one.
Well, I'm not the type that dreamt from early childhood that I'll be a diplomat. Not at all. In fact, I left options open most of my life. What happened was that I grew up in South Africa. I was born in South Africa. Then we made Aliyah and I immigrated to Israel when I was a teenager. And then I did schooling in Israel. And my father was a rabbi, a spiritual leader of the community, one of the largest communities in South Africa. So I grew up in a rabbinic family. And I studied at what's called the Yeshiva High School. And then I studied at a yeshiva, which mixed with military service. It's a 5-year program called Hesder. So I studied for about 2.5 years in yeshiva and then 2.5 years military service alternative. And during my army service, I was a paramedic, combat paramedic. And I served during the Lebanese war. So it was also a fascinating period of time. When I finished my Hesder program, then I began academic studies. And I thought I would be an academic. I did a Ph.D. in Jewish history, and I started teaching history at Bar-Ilan University in Israel. And everyone thought that I was going to be now an academic, and that's it. But I got this, this teaser, or I don't know, trigger of public activity. And I got voted into the student union of Bar-Ilan University. And then I got voted into the National Union of Israeli Students, which is the upper body of the entire student population in Israel, which is a very powerful body in Israel. And I served as the international director. In other words, exchanges of delegations. So we started doing delegations with different countries, student delegations, exchanges. And I started developing relations with countries that we had never done before. So like Turkey and Cyprus and other countries. And that caught the interest of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So they called me up. That's like the State Department, you know. So they called me up and they said they had an interest in these delegations because they were going to countries that we hadn't ever had exchanges of delegations at this level before. And so we developed a few programs together, including a mission of the heads of the student unions to Canada and to the United States and to Japan and to all kinds of things. And then one of them said to me, why don't you submit your credentials to be a diplomat? And that was the first time that I thought about it. And I was already in my late 20s. So my early 30s, actually. So I submitted my credentials. I'd already got that bug of public activity or whatever you might call it. And I gave in my credentials. I submitted my candidacy and I was accepted. So the rest is history. And the first year, actually, I taught while at Bar-Ilan University while doing the cadet course in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because I was already committed to teaching. So my story is a bit different from those that dream about it from childhood. I didn't dream about it. And the truth is that I'm very happy with the decision because now I'm part of history and I feel that I'm making history rather just reading about history.
Yeah.
I have to ask you, Dr. Newman, unlike any other country's Consul General, the Israeli Consul General not only has to serve the Israeli communities abroad, but also serve the Jewish communities at large. Growing up both in Israel and Los Angeles, I observed over the years that both communities are not always in sync with each other, especially politically, as we've seen in the latest election here in the US. Can you please share with our viewers what is the role of a Consul General and the complexity of navigating between these two communities? Because I can tell you, I'm not a diplomat and I can see how difficult it is to deal, because I deal with both. And what can we do to bring those communities closer together for the benefit of Israel?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Let's talk about, many people don't even know what is a consulate and what is a consul general and what does the terminology mean. So let me devote a minute for that. In every country where there is an official diplomatic mission of the state of Israel, if it's in the capital, it's called the embassy. But once the country opens up additional missions, and they cannot be called embassies because there's only one embassy in a country, which is in the capital. So the additional missions are called consulate generals. And the head of a mission is called the consul general. So like, for instance, the United States, we have 8, 9 missions spread around the United States. Each mission is responsible for quite a few states of the United States. So for instance, Washington is the embassy. But any other mission that is opened, like our mission in Miami, our mission in Atlanta, our mission in New York, is called a consulate general, and the head of the mission is a consul general. So that's just for the terminology. We also have other positions like a consul for public diplomacy, a consul for consular affairs, but the head of the mission is called a consul general. That's the difference in the terminology. Now, our mission is very wide-ranged. We're not actually opening a mission and appointed just to serve the Jewish community or the Israeli community. Our mission is much broader than that. Our mission is actually to strengthen the bipartisan relationship between Israel and the United States. That's the main objective of a mission of Israel. And for that, we do one-on-one and group meetings with elected officials. We meet the federal state elected officials. We meet state level officials. We have the federal level, like the congressmen who are in Washington, and you also have, but they're voted from here. So you have like 2 senators from California. So we meet them here in California. And for instance, members of Congress of the House of Representatives. So you have dozens of elected officials on the federal level, and you also have hundreds of elected officials on the state level. We meet mayors, council members, everything. We try and reach out to everybody and meet them and try to make sure that they're pro-Israel, or at least they have a positive affiliation with Israel. Other work that we do is reaching out to communities like Latino American, African American, churches, different religions, Muslim population, Christian population. So our agenda is very wide. We also have economic ties to try to increase trade between Israel and the United States and the jurisdiction of where we are. So we're responsible for Southern California and an additional 6 states, which is called the Pacific Southwest. That's why I'm called the Consul General for the Pacific Southwest. So we're responsible for an additional 6 states, and we're responsible for all these issues of the community outreach, elected officials, religious networking, and economic and commercial ties. In addition, we also have the Jewish community and the Israeli community. That is, of course, true. I would say there are differences between the Jewish community and the Israeli community. Sometimes it's also expressed politically, although, in the Israeli camp, you have just about every opinion. But there is like a majority, which I think is more conservative than the Jewish population, in the American Jewish population. But I think the objectives are clear and the same in all. It's the preservation of the relationship between Israel and the United States, and the security and safety of the state of Israel. We try to influence and make sure that the Jewish community in the United States preserves its Jewish identity as much as possible and has a close and good relationship with Israel. So that's part of our mission, that we have to care less with the Israeli community because they have a natural inclination of a good connection with the state of Israel. But the Jewish Americans who grow up in the United States, sometimes they don't even receive Jewish education. So that is very important for us to try and cultivate a good contact with Israel.
Does Israel pay for some of the birthright? I know that late Edelson, sponsored a lot of it. Does Israel contribute into programs like birthright?
Yes, Israel a few years back has changed its mode of thought, and instead of only being supported by diaspora Jewry, Israel now supports diaspora Jewry in many ways. I can tell you, for instance, Birthright, Taglit, Israel is a partner also in the financing of Birthright. All the Masa programs, which are run under the Jewish Agency, Israel pays a third of the costs of Masa.
My daughter went on it.
You
She
know,
went to Israel and Poland.
I wanted to share with you, Dr. Newman, that last week we released the episode of Lori Palatnik, who's the head of Momentum, and she expressed how the Israeli government helps to fund Momentum as well. So that's really a blessing.
Yeah, the Israeli government in many ways supports the diaspora. And I can tell you that I was ambassador in Uzbekistan, and we used to help in many ways, like bringing matzah for Passover, bringing wine for Passover, preserving the Jewish cemeteries in Uzbekistan. There are many ways that Israel now helps the diaspora. In fact, we can make a distinction between those communities that can support Israel and those communities that need the support of Israel. But even the United States, which with all the affluency and the wealth, in many ways, Israel supports diaspora community in the United States. And that includes also Jewish education. Israel has set up now a new bureau, which is Jewish education. And we're trying to help Jewish schools or even private families in their Jewish education of their children.
Yeah, we're going to go into that a little bit further. That was on our agenda.
That's on the agenda. But right now I wanted to ask you, in the last couple of years, we have seen not only an increase in anti-Semitism in the world, but also an increase in anti-Israel propaganda, both in the media and on college campuses. Historically, Jews have been unconditionally supportive of Israel, but unfortunately today, many Jews are not as supportive of Israel due to politics. Even though in our research, we found that 90% of Jews consider themselves to be Zionists. Why do you think that is? And what can we do to counteract this?
Yeah, I'll tell you. The movement there, which we call anti-Israeli, or like, for instance, the BDS movement, which calls for boycott of the state of Israel. Well, let's be very clear about it. The roots of the movement are actually anti-Semitism. It's classic anti-Semitism. But you know, it's become non-politically correct to attack Jews. Although there are many that do, of course, but amongst many, they find it difficult to attack Jews. So they attack the Jewish state. It's just another way of expressing that same old classic anti-Semitism. And in fact, we see like 3 stages in the development of anti-Semitism. The first stage was the hatred of the Jews on a religious basis, what was called Judenhass. The second stage is the racist ideology in the Nazi period, which was against Jews just because of the race. And now we're in a third development of the movement of anti-Semitism, which is the development of the hatred and the demonizing of the state of Israel as the one and only Jewish state. So it's the same classic anti-Semitism. Now, of course, many people, innocent people, well-meaning people, are swept up in a movement. And they think that it's only legitimate criticism, but it's not legitimate criticism. You know, Israel is one of the countries that every view is tolerated, and everyone can view just about any opinion. We're one of the most vibrant democratic societies in the world. We have a strong press and a strong judicial system, and every opinion just about is tolerated. So criticism is freely expressed in Israel. But this anti-Israel hatred goes far beyond criticism. What it tries to do is delegitimize the moral standing of the state of Israel, and by that, to try and prevent the existence of the state of Israel. So we take it seriously. We take it as a manifestation of anti-Semitism. I tell you, in the general public, in general opinion in the United States, we follow polls very closely, and we know that the mainstream, the majority are supportive of Israel, supportive of the relationship between Israel and the United States, the vast majority. There are fringes or periphery in all sectors, both parties, Democratic and Republican, that are against Israel. There are small units or nucleus, very often maneuvered by or manipulated by anti-Semitic factors. You have like a white supremacy, and you have also BDS supporters from all camps. So well, the main thing is to understand that anti-Semitism can come from any camp. It's not something that belongs to one political party or one political section or some social sector of society. It can come from anywhere, and therefore we must be aware of it.
You know, it's funny. I was on a conference call, and we were talking about something about making money, and one of my partner's colleagues, joking around, said, "Oh, I told you the money only goes to the Jews." And my daughter passed by my office, and she got so mad. And my kids are very polite, but she went on this Zoom, and I was like so shocked that I couldn't say anything. And she said, "You know, that was an anti-Semitic remark." And she said, "Well, I'm just joking." And she goes, "Well, it's not a joke." And I was very proud of her. Like, she threw me off that she went into my meeting, but I actually felt good that she stood up. But I was even shocked when she was, you know, sometimes we are so shocked that we don't even know what to say, you know?
Yeah, well, I salute your awareness of your kid, and that's important. It's important that we have a young generation that is well educated and that feels the connection to Israel and will stand strong against trends of society. You have trends of society or popular opinion, which may be totally incorrect, wrong perceptions, and we need people to stand strong. And that's the problem on the campuses, that you have large community, you have groups that go with the trend, go with the popular opinion, or go with, you know, whatever is popular at the time. And you need people to stand strong with the backbone and say, this is incorrect, this is not true, the facts are incorrect. For that, we need to cultivate a strong, good, valued generation that have values.
Right. I want to ask you, Hamas is once again launching rockets into Israel and promoting viral social media campaigns, encouraging assaults against Jews in the streets. We saw some assaults in New York. All the while, we have members of the new administration right now calling to cut aid to Israel. We recently observed Jews being attacked by Arabs in Israel and putting it on TikTok. What is the biggest challenge Israel is facing with the new administration?
Well, there are a few topics there interwoven, like Hamas and the administration. So
right.
let's go one by one.
Right.
Regarding the administration, look, as I said, both parties, Republican, Democrat, and the vast majority are pro-Israel. Mainstream is strong in its support and friendship with the state of Israel. That includes the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And President Biden is a good friend of the state of Israel for 4 decades already. He has a record of friendship towards Israel. So we look at things, we measure each person according to their opinions. We don't judge people according to their parties or according to their affiliations. We judge according to their views. And I'm happy to say that both the Democratic and Republican parties, the vast majority, are supportive of Israel. And we're very happy about that. At the same time, in both parties, Republican and Democrat, there are fringe groups that are problematic. In fact, sometimes even anti-Semitic. Like, you can have fringe groups in the Republican Party or in the Democratic Party that are over-critical of Israel and even move over to the side of BDS or hatred towards Israel. So, but we must always remember that these are fringe groups, periphery groups that do not represent the vast majority. The polls are clear, and our connections with the elected officials, we see this, that there's a strong relationship. Regarding aid to Israel, you know, there have been several legislations in the Congress, and they've been supportive of the aid towards Israel and the special relationship between Israel and the United States. It is true that there are some groups that would like to condition the aid on policy. This is not the official policy of the administration or of Congress right now. At the moment, the official stand is that the aid should not be conditioned on any policy, on any specific policy. And we have good friends in the Congress that are adamant about rejecting such legislation. Regarding Hamas, I would say about the Hamas that Hamas is an enemy. It's an enemy of the Western world, not only Israel. The problem is that it sits on our border, on the southern border. You know, we relinquished the territory of the Gaza Strip in order for the Palestinians to have their own entity and build their own life. And what happened was that the Hamas took over and then started launching rockets against Israel. So now we have more than 1 million people who have to fear rockets and sometimes have to run to bomb shelters within 15 seconds. Hamas is supported by Iran. Iran supports many anti-Israel terrorist groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and militias around the world. So we are aware, we have to be wary. For that, we need a strong IDF, and we need good modern technology like the Iron Dome, which was developed with the United States in order to intercept rockets mid-air. And you know, Iron Dome interceptors have now been deployed in the United States. So a combined joint effort of the United States and Israel is now protecting the United States. So that just shows how bringing the United States and Israel together is of benefit both to the United States and Israel in every way possible.
Wow. Dr. Newman, we're now going to transition from Hamas to tuition, Jewish tuition. Many Jewish parents are struggling to pay the high cost of Jewish private school tuition. It's just not sustainable. And as a result, enrollment rates are dropping. Subsequently, we are also seeing Jewish assimilation and intermarriages on the rise. What do you see as a possible solution to the tuition crisis across the country?
Yes, this is a matter of grave concern. I agree with you. We are concerned, Israel is concerned, and I myself is concerned sitting here in Los Angeles. I am certainly concerned that many families will not give their children Jewish tuition, heritage, you know, foundation for the future due to the high costs. So we must do everything that we can in order to make tuition available for anyone who wants it. Now, part of this, Israel has also taken this up as an issue, and the Ministry of Diaspora has actually established a desk, a bureau, which now devises plans, programs, Tochniot Limudim, that's, you know, curriculum for Jewish education abroad. And schools can, or even individuals can use this curriculum freely, no charge, in order to teach the younger generation. Wow. But we do need to address this issue. There were some philanthropists that came together and tried to establish like a foundation for Jewish education. The problem is that the costs are too high, and this has to be addressed. We have to find a solution to bring down the costs of private education.
Yeah, I mean, you saw the price firsthand. You have a son, and you're living here, and I'm certain he was going to Jewish school, and you see firsthand how much it is. It's very expensive. Yes,
I do. I see it firsthand. And this is an issue of grave concern, but it needs many factors coming together.
Yes.
It needs, you know, a state to devise and understand how to maneuver. It needs philanthropists, perhaps, to come in and support the teachers, because I mean, in the end, you need a lot of money to have tutors. Right. You can't. No one expects tutors to teach for free. So there are a lot of expenses involved, and we have to find solutions to cover the expenses. You know, in Israel, we have state schooling, which is almost free for schooling of all the young age till grade 12, really. The expenses are very, very small. The problem is that out of Israel, it's not part of the state schooling. So one option is also to try and get what we call now private schooling into systematic state schooling. This, of course, needs the cooperation of the authorities, it needs the cooperation of the teachers. You have to bring a lot of factors together, but I think that it should be done.
A bunch of families here formed Lashon Academy, which is a charter school. Right. You know, it's not 100% Jewish school, but it's better than sending them to public schools. It's so funny. I never envied Karen until last year, because her daughter graduated high school. I still have a little one. My middle daughter graduated with her daughter, and I still have, and I'm like, Karen, I never envied you in 30 years of friendship, but I envy you now. I can't wait till my kids are, but it shouldn't be like that, you know? Instead of enjoying the journey, like myself, I'm like, oh my God, how many more years do I have to pay tuition? And it's really funny because college now
is cheaper than high school.
Right, Berkeley is cheaper for me than was sending my daughter to high school. So I'm actually excited that she's in college and paying college tuition.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you're an ambassador to 2 Muslim countries, which I think, I did a little bit of research because, when I pronounce the countries, my daughter goes, "Are you watching Borat?" So I wanted to do a little research, and I noticed that both countries have maybe 100 Jewish people, 100 families, or 100 in the country, and you're an observant Jew. I wanted to ask you, what was your experience living? Like, who do you befriend? Who's your chavruta in those countries? It was very interesting to me to find out from you what was your experience.
And like, I'm sure when you go out, like, it's like they can't treat you, you can't treat them, because of your status, so the relationship is different with the friendship, just like a judge,
Well, I'll tell you, my service, I served as ambassador to 2 Muslim states, which was Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. The Republic of Uzbekistan is in Central Asia, and I served in the capital, which is Tashkent, for 5 years. I was responsible for these 2 states. And I can tell you that it was a fascinating period of time. It's a different world, different activity completely than here. Here, a large part of our work is what we call public diplomacy, which is like giving speeches and interviews on TV or public work. There, that hardly exists. The main bulk of the work is very quiet, under the table, very confidential. So it's a different type of work completely, but it's fascinating. And I can tell you that the people of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan are very warm towards Israel. There's a wonderful friendship. Although they're Muslim, they belong to the faction of Islam that feels that Judaism and Islam are relatives, are kins, and that they feel warmth towards Judaism. We're used to the Islam of the Middle East, which is very politicized and sees things through the lens of the politics of the Palestinian issue and things like that. But there's a large part of Islam which sees Judaism as a close relative and feels a very close, warm place in their heart towards Judaism. And that's the majority. There's mainly the Sunni Islam. And we see it now with the normalization of relations with Arab states, right, that actually they're very warm towards Israel. The reason that they couldn't have relations before was politics. It wasn't that they don't have a friendship towards Jews or Israel. And now we have peace with UAE and Bahrain and Morocco. And that the friendship is there because that type of Islam, which sees the Jewish people as relatives. What can I say about eating with people or socializing? We did a lot of socializing. There is a problem with food because I do keep kosher, and it's, that problem is not only with Muslim people, it can also be with but when I'm invited to someone, then I tell them in advance that I don't eat meat unless it's kosher meat. So I eat like a vegetarian meal, and they understand that. And I can tell you that many people in Uzbekistan, for instance, they went out and they bought kosher meat so that they can host me in their home. Regarding the Jewish community in Uzbekistan, I just say that there are about 8,000 Jews in Uzbekistan, which is the largest nucleus of Jews in Central Asia. In other words, you have many countries in Central Asia, like Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. The largest group of Jews is in Uzbekistan, where there's about 8,000. In Tajikistan, there are only a few hundred, as you mentioned, and the Jewish population needs support. And that's why part of the mission of the ambassador is to support them and help them.
Are they observant, or are they less observant?
Well, today they're less observant. the majority are not fully observant in Uzbekistan or Tajikistan. The truth is that many of them left. You know, there were hundreds of thousands of Jews, but they left when the doors opened, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and the doors opened, and Uzbekistan became an independent state. Jews were allowed to leave. The vast majority left. They left for Israel, for Los Angeles. There are many Bukharian Jews here in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Also in Vienna. There are different centers of what we call Bukharian Jews, or those that come from Bukhara, which is Uzbekistan. But the vast majority left. And those that remained in Uzbekistan either didn't have the means or couldn't leave because of family or elderly relatives or something like that. And they have, I can't say that the majority are religious or observant.
Does Chabad have a presence there?
Yes, there is. There are, for instance, in Tashkent, there is a Ashkenazi synagogue, which is under the hands of Chabad, really. And there is also a Bukhari synagogue, which is a separate synagogue. But the rabbi is actually serving both synagogues. So there's one rabbi who serves both synagogues, and one is a Chabad and one is a Bukhari synagogue.
Very nice.
I love Chabad. That's one thing I love about Chabad.
Wherever there's Coca-Cola, there's Chabad, right? I am sure, Dr. Newman, that after your appointment as Consul General, the Israeli government had goals in mind for you to achieve here. I'm sure you have personal aspirations as well. What are some of those aspirations that you have?
Well, first of all, I would say the aspiration is to reach out to different communities and as many people as possible and touch them in a positive way, creating a positive association with Israel. That is I would say, if I had to define what is my dream, my dream is to touch as many people in Los Angeles and our 6 states that we're responsible for, and connect with them in a positive way and create a positive association with Israel.
Mm-hmm.
For that, we do different things. We reach out, we go out to churches. We've done a few projects, for instance, of giving out computers and headphones to Latino communities and African-American communities. We're setting up now a computer hub in South LA, which will serve the community at large. So these are part of our programs in order to reach out. We physically go to, when we can, because of coronavirus, but when we can, we go to churches and we speak publicly in the church. We meet with the leaders of the communities and the communities themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I say, is our number one mission. There's also something unique about Los Angeles, and that's the celebrity world. And the unique aspect.
You're here with the Yentas.
Yeah, but what is unique? The unique thing is that, you know, in the past, we used to think that what the mission is to write articles in the newspaper. That way you reach out to many people. And today we know that one person can have 10 million followers.
Absolutely.
And one tweet can be worth more than 10,000 articles in the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
So today it's a different world. Social media is a big part of it. So we run also a department of social media, but we try to reach out to the celebrities, so that if one of them comes out and says something positive about Israel, that can have more influence than many activities that you do.
And I think
Karen and I are actually working right now on a project. We're trying to get a project going to bring kids from public schooling that are not Jewish to the Simon Wiesenthal Center.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been working on it. It's not, there's a lot of logistics. We are hoping it will eventually take off because we have to work with the Unified School District. But we are hoping that we'll achieve that goal. That's one of our goals as the Yentas.
That's a wonderful goal. And I have very good contact and friendship with Rabbi Heyer and Rabbi Cooper and Rabbi May of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And we work together with them a lot. But we should also remember that the Simon Wiesenthal Center has a universal message. It's not really an Israel message. So we're also, as a consulate, we're trying to get across with an Israeli contact, an Israeli connection. There are even some public schools that teach Hebrew, by the way.
Right.
You mentioned the Lashon, but there are other schools. Even in San Diego, I went to visit a school where they teach Hebrew, and it's a public school. So you can touch school children and different sections of society in different ways, and we tried to do that.
Dr. Newman, before we end the interview, can you share with us what was the most unforgettable moment of your career? And also, if there is anything else you want that is important that you want to use this platform to tell the Jewish and Israeli community.
Yeah, my unforgettable moment of my career. Look, I've had
other than meeting the Yentas, no.
that's I still have to internalize the long-term implications of meeting the Yentas. But look, I've had many things in my life. Thank God, I would say. I think that different experiences enrich you, and therefore I'm happy for every experience, even if it's a bad experience. But there've been so many things. But let me choose one story. I used to serve as a policy advisor to foreign ministers, 3 foreign ministers, and that meant that I was really in the intimate circle. We used to sit and with the minister, the decisions are made. So when you're a policy advisor, you really see everything. You see the forest, not only the trees. And there were very many moments of a dilemma, a very significant dilemma, and a decision has to be made. And I think that's the most unforgettable moments, let's say, in my career, in sitting at the table and watching this process of decision making at a high level. I'll just give one amusing story, perhaps. Was that once I was working with a foreign minister, and a foreign minister of an African country came for a visit, and they had a session together, and the African foreign minister left, and then about an hour or two after the meeting, the next day after the meeting, the chief of staff of this foreign minister calls me, and he says, "We have to meet the minister again." So this is unprotocoled, and minister has a schedule. It's not very easy to set another meeting with a minister. So I said, "Well, can you tell me what the issue is? Why? What do you need? What's so urgent?" He said, "No, I can't tell you, but we need to have another meeting with the minister." So I went to the minister and I said, "Look, we've got this situation. Are you prepared to make time in your schedule for another meeting?" And the minister said, "No, find a solution." So I said, "Okay, I found a solution." I said, "I'll be a special emissary on behalf of the foreign minister to go to meet the foreign minister to hear what he has to say." So I presented it that way, and they said, "Okay." So I went to the hotel of the minister who was in Tel Aviv, and I go to the hotel and I come into his room and I say, "I understand you need to send another message to the foreign minister. Please tell me and I will deliver it." And the minister says, "Okay." He sits down, he says, "Last night I had a dream and God came to me and he appointed me to solve the peace in the Middle East. And that's what I wanted to tell the minister." So that's one of my unforgettable moments. Regarding a message to the Jewish community, I would say that it's so important to be involved. Everyone should make sure that the next generation, their family, is involved, knows the facts, studies the situation, shouldn't be fed with misinformation and perceptions which are incorrect. The more the family is a model, so the children will also stand up and stand straight and be proud. I think that every Jew should be proud of their Jewish heritage. We have done so much for the world. Every Israeli should be proud of the fact that they belong to the Israeli country, which is really, we're only 73 years old, but we're a powerhouse and a global leader in so many ways. So everyone should just be proud of their heritage and their identity and stand up strong and be involved. That's my message.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Newman. Thank you so much for joining us today. Your service to the state of Israel can't be described in words. We are so blessed to have you as our Consul General in Los Angeles. This past year and a half has been very challenging for all of us, but knowing we have a Consul General who is very attentive to our community is truly a gift. Thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak to us today. We are so appreciative.
My pleasure. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Etty, and good luck to everybody. Good health to everybody.
Thank you. We would like to thank all of our followers for listening to this episode. Please remember you can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Yentas in the City. You can also write to us at dearyentas@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you and answer your letters on our weekly advice column. We would like to thank our sponsors, Soft Smart Systems International and Conquest Realty Investments. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We have a lot more coming. This is Karen Cohen and Etty Elkis, and we are Yentas in the City. Remember to always be the Ruth in the room and do the right thing. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you, Consul General.
Thank you.